Hi everyone and welcome. Today I'm going to talk about the Stormlight Archive series by Brandon Sanderson and then more specifically why it did not work for me. So before we get into my specific gripes for that series, let's just give you my Brandon Sanderson resume, as you will, because I have read books written by him in the past that are set in the Cashmere, and I've quite enjoyed the majority of them. When I was new to fantasy, I actually started with Mistborn Era 1 and I fell in love with that series. I then continued with Mistborn Era 2, or at least the 3 books that were out at that time, and I did not like them at all. I did not like how Brandon Sanderson did characterization in those works, and that's a very big gripe that I have with Stormlight Archive as well, so maybe a sense of foreboding right there. But I also read Warbreaker and Elantris, and I really enjoyed both of those. Now, I must say that I am a very atypical Brandon Sanderson reader, because Elantris is probably my favorite work by him that I have read. And most people who are Brandon Sanderson fans say that that is his weakest work. So it's definitely true that I am not the typical Brandon Sanderson fan, and that might be the reason why I did not enjoy Stormlight Archive. But of course, hindsight 2020, I suppose, I did not know that going into this series. I thought that I was going to love it. This is often said that it's going to be, when it is completed, 10 books in total, Brandon Sanderson's magnum opus, that this is the best work that he has started, and that this is probably the best series that modern fantasy has to offer. So to say that I had high hopes is an understatement. Unfortunately, I DNF'd the series. The second book in Words of Radiance I did not complete, so the only book in the Stormlight Archive that I have read in completion is The Way of Kings. So most of my gripes are with this book, but I still went into Words of Radiance with high hopes. I thought, well, maybe it is getting better. A lot of people told me that there were some extra POVs that I was going to enjoy, but Words of Radiance just felt like the same thing over and over again, and it had the same issues that I had with Words of Radiance. With Words of Radiance, with The Way of Kings, of course. So first of all, characters. Now, if you're not new to my channel, you know that I am a very character-driven reader, and what I immediately saw while reading Words of Radiance was that this is a plot-driven series. A lot of the things that the characters do are to move the plot forward, and even though I cannot say anything bad about the plot, because as far as that is concerned, in the first book and in the start of the second one, the plot is quite solid. But when I can see gears turning, when I can see certain characters do certain things because that is important for the plot, I do think that that is a flaw. And even though that is a personal taste thing, I also think that just in general, how his characters were done and how they felt was just not realistic. Now, sometimes that can be done quite well. I've often made the parallels or the comparison between Stormlight Archive and a Marvel movie which has superheroes, and even though I'm not the biggest fan of Marvel movies at all, I can enjoy it there because that's what I'm expecting. In manga series, often the emotions and how characters show you their emotions are quite over the top. This is not realistic. However, in a manga, I expect these things, so it does not bother me. However, if I pick up an epic fantasy series, I do expect realistic characters. I expect characters to do things that feel like a normal human person in this world would do as well. And that's an issue that I had here, and one of the examples that I can give you that happened in the first book are two side characters. One of them tells a joke to the other one, and the other one is laughing so hard that he is rolling over the floor laughing, and he almost falls off a cliff. Now, this immediately pulls me out of the story, because no human being would ever do this. And this is the example that I say, if this happens in a manga, that's fine, because I expect things like that. I expect the over-the-top emotions in a manga. I do not expect them in an epic fantasy series, and I would not even like them in a Marvel series. So this immediately pulls me out of the story. Some of the things that the main characters did felt quite similar, where reactions were over-the-top, reactions were not layered, not nuanced, and this immediately pulled me out of the story. So all in all, I don't think that how Brandon Sanderson does characters is something that I can enjoy. And even though that might have been present in the other works by him that I have read, one, I was not as deep into fantasy as I am right now. So it could be that my style or that my preferences have changed over the years. But also, those were shorter works. Those were standalones or a trilogy at max. And I think that there I can appreciate a little bit more. Those were more easygoing, those were faster reads, and you are not setting your teeth as deep into those series or standalones as in a big magnum opus. So I think that because of that, it just irked me the wrong way even more in this series. But I still had those issues with the Wax and Wayne series. Mistborn Era 2, I felt like these characters were cardboard characters, just as in Stormlight Archive. So yes, characters, at the very least, I was not enjoying. Now, something that I also really did not like was the writing style. And here I must say that I do respect Brandon Sanderson as an author because he has a way of writing very direct, but also very accessible for people who are new to the fantasy genre, for people who might not have been reading for a long time, and just in general, they have a broad and a wide appeal. And this is something that you don't really see a lot of other fantasy authors do, especially with these long and big and complex series. Often the writing style is not as easy either. So when I read Miss Von Arrow 1, this really propelled me into fantasy. This made me pick up other fantasy books, and now we are here. Fantasy is a very big part of my life. So this is something that I will always be thankful for towards Brandon Sanderson. So that it is a direct and an easygoing writing style, I don't have an issue with that. But I see mistakes in these books. And one example that I want to give is, and this is also an example of why I don't like the writing style, but we will get back into that. But we have a scene where we see a son listening to a conversation between his father and another person, and both of these are very important in the army. And they have that conversation, they both want something from the other person. Now that conversation is quite straightforward. A normal reader, and I don't think that you need to be very well known to the fantasy genre, I don't think that you need to have a lot of brain power for this. Anyone who got to that point in the series would be able to understand the dialogue, would be able to understand the nuances between them, and that what they were saying was actually also trying to nudge them, threat them, have all of that subtext in between. However, at the same time, even though you should know it from what is happening right there, you also have the son, and you have him internally explaining to you what is actually happening here. Like, oh, my father is saying this right now, but this is actually a veiled threat so that the other person will do what he wants. Yeah, we know, you don't need to explain it all over again. So that's something the explaining, and he shows and then he tells at the same time. And I don't mind if you do one or the other, and if you try to sometimes show, sometimes tell. That's actually something that I like quite a bit. I don't mind when you tell a lot of things instead of showing, but if you do both, it makes the reader feel like you think that he's stupid. So either you don't trust your own talent as an author to just pick one and the reader will understand, or you do think that your audience is stupid. So that really rubbed me the wrong way, especially with the size of these books. This is 1,000 pages, and I think that it could have been shorter if we had a good editor here who said, well, you don't need to do both of these. Pick one. Either you have the son telling the reader or thinking about what happened between his father and that other person, or you just show the dialogue, but not both of them. Something that also happened here was that the son talked about subtext. Now, this is a world where only women can write, only women can read. So a male character talking about subtext just seems a little bit far-fetched. Well, it does not seem far-fetched. It seems like a mistake. It seems like something that a good beta reader or a good editor would have to take out and say, well, that is something that that character would not say. So even there, the character does not feel like a real person because it's not in one line. It's not fluent. He does things that are not true to his character, not true to what is established in this world. And that's just a clear mistake. And I think that that comes from maybe writing too many books in a very short amount of time and not taking the careful time and crafting it as you should. So I think that these are small mistakes that are very naturally added to the story when you just don't spend enough time with that story, and maybe also when editors and beta readers are not really being extremely strict because you are already a very well-known author. I'm not saying that that's the case, but that immediately drew me out of the story, and there are multiple examples. This is just one that I took because it really, really annoyed me at that point, but there are multiple that I think, well, maybe pay a little bit more attention here, and I don't mind straightforward storytelling, but your storytelling and the words that you use need to be consistent with the world that you have crafted and needs to be consistent with the character that is saying or thinking these words. Another example of showing and telling at the same time is one of the secondary characters has an accent. He comes from a different part of the world, and you have that character, and they talk in English, of course. When you're reading it, it's in English, but you can see that he uses certain words the wrong way. And you can see that, and you can understand that is because he comes from that different part of the world. But then you have another character also thinking, oh, he says these words differently because he is from a different part of the world. It's just these repetitions of what you already saw and what you already deduced yourself, then being spoon-fed to you all over again, that I just think does not fit in a very big supposed to be complex fantasy series. So although I like that he tries to keep his storytelling, his prose, quite simple so that it's accessible for everybody, he does not need to go too far with it, and that's what happens here in this book. And I think that it could have easily been 200 pages shorter without any difference in the plot, with any difference in the characterization, with any difference in the world building, but just removing those unnecessary extra additions. Now, when we go to world building, I think that here he also looked at other big fantasy authors. He saw the very complex worlds that they have with different cultures, with different vegetations, the fauna and flora is different, and he tried to do the same thing, but it just does not work for me because I can see the gears grinding. It seems like it's a very complex world, but it's only mud deep. When you delve deeper and when you try to see why are certain things like this, why is a religion like this, why does this culture believe something that's different than this culture, you don't find an explanation. There's actually no explanation at all. He crafted this world without any reasoning behind it. For example, there is one group of people who have blue nails. That's it. You don't know why they have blue nails, they just have that. And it's something that he threw in there, I think, just to have a very diverse world. But if you then don't explain to me why, that's an issue. Now, on the other side, there are definitely some fauna and flora things that he did that I did think were quite interesting. So sometimes he hits, but more often, for me at least, he missed in that department. And I just felt like, it's like when you watch a play and you see those nice wooden trees, they look real, but then you touch them and you feel, it's actually carton, it's cardboard, it's not real. That's how I feel when you think about Brandon Sanderson's world in this book. And I think that he could have done a better job. So even though it's enjoyable on the surface, there's nothing really more to it. And when I compare that to other very big fantasy series, such as A Song of Ice and Fire, such as Robin Hobb's Realm of the Elderlings, such as the Witcher series even, I think that they crafted a more naturally evolved world where things are the way they are because of history, because of multiple reasons, where this was not the case here. Another thing that I think Brandon Sanderson did to have this very big magnum opus is have interludes inside the story. And these are, I think that the first book, The Way of Kings, is set into 4 different parts. And between each part you have an interlude. And there you meet different people that you have not seen before. They are from different parts of the world. Again, I almost feel like an artificial way of making the world seem bigger with these interludes. But the interludes, you don't care because you don't know these people, you don't know why these interludes are important, and in the interludes, nothing really important or exciting happens either. So you're left thinking, why should I read them? Now, very big Brandon Sanderson fans have told me that it's all going to have a purpose in the end. You just need to keep reading, you need to be patient. I agree. I love twists at the end. I love when you don't really know why you're reading something, but then in the end, it's all clear. I have read series like that. I know that a lot of people, when I say that I don't like Brandon Sanderson, when I say that I don't like Wheel of Time, they tend to be quite condescending, telling me that, they are quite difficult series. It's a lot to comprehend in one time. Well, I have read big series. It's not that it's too convoluted. It's not that it's too difficult for me to understand. But it's not enjoyable to read, and that's an issue. When I'm reading Malazan by Steven Erikson, there are definitely a couple of scenes that I have questions, that I don't really know why I'm reading this, why is it this important. But while I'm reading it, at that moment, I'm enjoying it. And then when I have the reveal later on, I'm enjoying it even more. But here, with these interludes, he did not make them enjoyable to read. And maybe they have a big reveal at the end, maybe they have a big twist in the end. And when you then know that, and you go and read them back again, in hindsight, well, yes, maybe that is amazing. But he needs to give you that immediate enjoyment as well. And I do think that the series falls flat in that point for me. This is all my own opinion, as you guys know. So, all in all, I do think that his plot and his magic system, and I do think that Brandon Sanderson might be one of the first people who talked about a magic system instead of just magic, soft magic, hard magic. Brandon Sanderson said, I have an entire system. And I enjoyed that in Mistborn, I enjoyed that in Warbreaker, I enjoyed that in Elantris. I think that my personal gripe with the Stormlight Archive series is that the magic system is very superhero-esque. It has a lot of action, it has a lot of flying around, and it does not feel like magic anymore at this point. I did not have a problem with the other series or standalones by him that I have read, but this one just feels like it's taking it a step too far, where the magical effect of it and the fantasy-esque feeling that I have when I read fantasy goes away here. And maybe that is because I'm not the biggest fan of superheroes. Maybe if you do like Marvel movies, DC movies, maybe this is right up your alley. But for me, specifically, it did not work, although I can see that the system that he crafted is very neatly done, and it is a very unique system there. And there are definitely some twists in the first book already that I really like, and there are also some action scenes, and I'm not the biggest fan of action scenes, that he did rather well, and especially in the last quarter of the book. And that is something that I can definitely see why Brandon Sanderson was the perfect author to finish Wheel of Time. Because he writes the exact same way as Robert Jordan, or at least he is one of the authors that writes closest to Robert Jordan, and I DNF'd Wheel of Time, so there you go. Maybe that's not all that surprising when you know that I also didn't like Stormlight Archive. But what Robert Jordan often did was the first 3/4 of the story, they were not that well crafted. They could have been shorter. He should have used an editor in a lot of places, but then that last quarter, that was superb. And that made me read the first 4 books of Wheel of Time, because every time the ending of those books were so amazing that I was hyped up and I was going to read the next book. And then it felt like a drag again. The first 3/4, nothing was happening, nothing was exciting. But that ending though. And when I read Way of Kings, it felt like the exact same formula was being used. The first 3/4, not that exciting, not that interesting. The last quarter, amazing, one of the best endings that I've read. And I will still say that the second book of Wheel of Time has one of the best endings that I've ever read. But because I saw the same thing happening here, I was already very hesitant and thinking, if this is going to happen for 5 books on end that are 1,000 pages long, I don't know if I'm going to be a big fan of that. So when Words of Radiance had the same thing where I read the first quarter, didn't really like it, and then heard people say, but that ending though, that was a red flag for me. I was not going to read 10 books in the end where only the last quarter of each book was going to be something that I found enjoyable. So all in all, this is a fast-paced book, and that's something that I don't like, but that is a personal issue. I think that the characters are not well crafted. Again, that's a personal issue, but they don't feel like real people to me. If that's something that you don't find important, then go ahead and read these books, I suppose. But on top of that, I do think that the world building feels a little bit clunky, it feels artificial, and the way that the book is written, it could have been improved. That's the only thing I'm saying here. So if you do want to see my spoiler-filled discussion for the first book, you can find that one right here. And if you want to know why I did not like Wheel of Time either, I will link that book in the description box down below. That video in the description box down below. As always, I do hope that you enjoyed this video. Please let me know if you did like Stormlight Archive and if the issues that I had with it, if you agree with them or not, and if you think that I would enjoy the series if I continue reading. And to be honest, I'm not going to continue reading, so you can tell me if I would like it or not, but I'm not going to put any more investment in this series. But these were my reasonings why I did not like the first book and the start of the second book in the Stormlight Archive series by Brandon Sanderson. As always, I hope that you enjoyed this video and see you next time. Bye!